This is the brand new Asus ROG Xbox Ally X, and in today's video, I'm gonna try and turn it into a Steam Deck. But before we get into that, today's video sponsor is Micro Center O'Clock with their amazing fall sales event, where not only can you get one of the best gaming CPUs ever made for well over $100 off, there's also huge amounts of other goodies, including a crazy sale on Micro Center's power spec PCs. And Phoenix, I see you feeling all left out by this Micro Center action, but don't worry, you've got a Micro Center coming soon. Sign up for a free 128 gig flash drive when the store opens. And finally, for all of your tech news needs, there's Micro Center News. Links for everything down below. Now, quick disclaimer, I didn't actually buy this ROG Xbox Ally X. In fact, Asus flew us to the press event where they announced it in Toronto, which was really interesting. We got to meet a bunch of people behind the design process of making this product happen, which is pretty cool. It's a bunch of passionate people excited about their thing. They also had a bunch of prototypes on display going through the various iterations of the grip on the Ally X. It was cool to see kind of how they got to this shape, a shape which is really good, by the way. The ergonomics on this device is one of the main selling points on it, in my opinion. They also showed off other products in the lineup, like an external GPU that can have up to an RTX 5090 in it that you can plug into this via the Thunderbolt 4 on it. Now we'll see in some of the performance testing later on that I just don't think that that's a product that makes sense for this use case. Like with laptops and stuff, it makes more sense, but you'll see why I think that. But obviously, despite all of that, I still get to say what I want about this. It's a requirement for this kind of thing for me. And you won't question that, considering what we're gonna do in the video with it today. After having used it for about a week, there is a lot that I like about it, but there's also a pretty big deal breaker aside from the price, which I think is another one. Even if it is priced around its similarly spec'd competition, it's a gut-wrenching amount for a handheld in my opinion. But the main deal breaker, and I'm not going to beat around the bush here, is just the Windows on it. And I'm not even a Windows hater. I've been A/Bing Windows and Linux on my home system for the past 2 months, and honestly, I kind of prefer Windows 11 to Linux. But on a handheld gaming console, Windows 11 is a nightmare, but we'll get more into that later in the video. But before we get into that, let's do a quick overview of the ROG Xbox Ally X. Here are its most important numbers. It's got AMD's newest handheld console APU in it, with 24 gigs of fast memory in it. Its 1080p 120Hz display is not an OLED, which is a pretty big bummer, but it's a decent not an OLED. They modeled the grips on Xbox controllers, and you can really tell it feels amazing. This is ergonomically the best handheld gaming console I've interacted with. I don't have a huge framework of reference here. I've only spent a bunch of time gaming on both Nintendo Switches, which ergonomically are basically bamboo fingernail torture. Those are terrible. And then aside from them, I've also spent a bunch of time gaming on a Steam Deck, which is much better than the Nintendo Switch consoles. Again, that's not difficult. But this Ally X feels way more comfy than even the Steam Deck. And then finally, it's got pretty good speakers. They're loud, powerful, and clear. But with that quick overview out of the way, let's get back to the main problem I'm gonna try and fix with the Ally X, Windows 11. Now this will almost definitely not surprise you, but Windows 11 does not scale well to an Xbox controller and a touch screen that's like 8 inches across. It is first and foremost a desktop operating system. Now obviously both Microsoft and Asus worked on this device together, and they realized that clearly because they tacked on a whole bunch of features to try and make Windows 11 a lot more functional on a handheld like this. When you first fire it up, aside from the several hours of updating that happens, it's crazy how much updating needs to happen. I mean, this was a pre-sale sample, so I think it does more updating than like a retail one would do, but Windows needs to update and log in, and it's just a nightmare of a process setting this thing up. But once you're through that process, every time you launch the device, it takes you straight into the Xbox app. Now, the Xbox app on here is fine. It reminds me of a smart TV operating system where it gives you some tiles of stuff that you normally use at the top, and then the rest of it just feels like crap it's trying to sell to you. But as the frog slowly boiling in water famously said, it's the kind of terrible I'm pretty used to at this point. However, aside from the Xbox app, Asus also added a bunch of functionality under their Armory crate, or whatever their software ecosystem is called, and a lot of this stuff works pretty well. I mean, you press the Armory crate button and then you get a whole bunch of options to control various settings on the device. Aside from that, you can also go into an Armory crate app, which is kind of like the Xbox app, but Asus's version. I do kind of prefer it to the Xbox app though, because it's more a landing page for your other game launchers than like an Xbox Game Pass store. So if you've been following along, there's basically like 3 different operating systems on this device. You've got Windows 11, which forms the base layer, and then you have the Xbox app on top of that next to the ROG thing. And one thing that's become abundantly clear in this last week of me using this device is that Windows 11 is not a bottom. You should not use it as the base to build other stuff on top of. I get that it technically gives you a huge amount of functionality, like you've got console functionality and proper desktop functionality on the thing, but the software experience on this device is a bit of a nightmare to interact with. Every time you click on a thing, like 4 other launchers have to happen, which means almost every input takes like a minute to happen on the device. And what makes it even worse is that some of the times the device just ignores the inputs, which combined with how slow everything is, means that you spend half of your time waiting for stuff to happen, not knowing if it actually registered the input and it's just taking long, or if the thing's crashed in the background. It almost feels like the device is gaslighting you. And I know that I always get a lot of flack on this channel when I complain about stuff not working the way that I expect it to. Everybody's always like, it's user error. You're just too stupid to use it properly. Well, there are several other reviews where people dedicate like half the review complaining about how the software experience feels like you're trying to herd a cat with dementia. So it's not just me. Now I get why Asus used Windows 11 on this device. They did partner with Microsoft, but I feel like if you Microsoft can at least write a proper console operating system for this thing. Like, I don't know why they didn't do that and just had some half-assed layer Xbox app on top of it. But after having lived with a Steam Deck that runs SteamOS for the last year, I just can't go back to a device like this. And I really want to because I love the ergonomics of the device, but I get because of that partnership, we're probably never gonna get an official alternative operating system option for this thing, at least from Asus. So I've decided to take things into my own hands. I've decided to try and install some Bazzite on this bad boy, which is basically SteamOS. Now, this Xbox Ally X hasn't been out for very long, so I'm not expecting Bazzite to support it very well. But when you go onto Bazzite's website, there is actually an option for the Ally and the Ally X. Now, I think this may be the previous generation version of the Ally and the Ally X, but when you click on the link, it takes you to this ROG Xbox Ally X's website, so maybe it'll work fine. Let's give it a try. Now, installing Bazzite was really straightforward. I just downloaded the image for what I hope was the correct Ally, and then wrote the ISO to a USB drive using software called Rufus. And then once I plugged the Bazzite install into the Xbox Ally, initially it seemed very promising, but I quickly ran into an issue. No way, is it this easy? It wasn't, it refused to install.
Unknown error, this program? I think it was crying about the disk.
The problem was Windows encrypted the drive and wouldn't let it format. So I launched back into Windows and turned off drive encryption. And then instead of just deleting everything on the drive, I decided to split the drive in two, making a new partition, so that I could dual boot between Windows 11 and Bazzite. I feel like this is the better way to go about it, considering that I don't really know if this is going to be compatible properly or not, so I don't want to just wipe the thing's brain completely. But anyway, once the drive encryption was off, I could install Bazzite on the new partition, although once the system booted into Bazzite, I ran into a little bit of a problem.
Hey, that was so easy. Okay, well, it's not reading any of our controls. That's not a good start. Okay, so none of the controls work. Oh wow, it's already so much smoother running. What in the world?
Now straight off the bat, the little Ally X is way more responsive now. It almost feels like I decalcified its brain. Every time you touch it, stuff just happens instantly. No more minute-long waits for bits of UI to pop up. However, there is a trade-off. We've lost a lot of functionality, basically all of it. Like the RGB rings around the thumbsticks don't work anymore. I don't know how to access any of the power modes. I think it's on performance, but I don't know. We'll see in the performance benchmarks in a second. It might still be able to access it somewhere in here, but I don't know how to get to it. There was also the issue of when I initially started it up, none of the controls worked, but that kind of sorted itself out after a couple of minutes. However, I did still have to do a bit of a binding process because like the menu buttons didn't work, and most of them still don't work, but we do still have access to like a main menu, and that's kind of it. The rest of the buttons here on the side, it doesn't really do anything. But having said all that, I am curious to see if there's actually a gaming performance difference. Now for the testing, initially I had an issue getting a performance overlay going. When I wasn't in Cyberpunk yet, Steam didn't seem to have a performance overlay option. So I decided to download and set up Mango HUD, but that didn't show up once I was in Cyberpunk. However, once I launched into Cyberpunk and brought up the Steam menu, now it gave me the option to use the Steam performance overlay. So I guess it sorted itself out. And then the final issue was while setting up the settings for Cyberpunk, the game couldn't figure out what resolution the display was. That setting was just blank, which was very weird. So I'm just gonna assume that it's running at 1080p, and then I decided to use the Steam Deck performance preset.
What is interesting is that the Z2 Extreme's CPU does seem to struggle keeping up with the GPU in here. So this is the kind of setup where you're not necessarily going to benefit a lot in terms of kind of max achievable frame rate when dropping in an external GPU.
I then tried switching the invisible resolution setting just to see what would happen, but it didn't seem to affect the frame rate at all.
But I think on that note, let us do our benchmark.
And straight off the bat, we got a huge performance jump compared to running it on Windows, but things were looking kinda weird in the settings.
That's why the frame rate's so high. Hey, we found a way to see the resolution.
However, changing that invisible resolution setting and going through different power settings of Fidelity FX didn't change that number, so I'm not sure how accurate it is. At which point, I decided to try another game, Shadow of Mordor, which could figure out what resolution the display was. And running at 1080p, I got exactly the same performance in both Windows and on Bazzite. And then, when I went back from Windows to Bazzite, the controls broke again, so yeah, I don't think this is a very good idea. Even if, when I went back to Bazzite the next day, both the controls and the RGB was working now for some reason. Which brings me to the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, subscribe for more videos like this one, and until the next video, bye-bye.